What's going on, guys? My name is Tommy. Welcome back to the channel Flying in 2nd edition. Wings, three-dimensional combat. It's a thing we're gating pretty hard in 2nd edition right now. And on the one hand, I understand it's difficult, it's different and hard to balance. And on the other hand, I really like flying in TTRPGs. So today, another session 04, min-maxing for fun and profit. How to balance flying in your games. Remember, if you're liking what you're seeing, to like, subscribe, ding the bell. I can pop them like that. There you go. Stay caught up with all your Pathfinder 1st, 2nd, and I guess I need to say Starfinder content. And I guess I clearly also need a shorter catchphrase. Remember, the Patreon is the #1 way to support the channel. Help us do bigger and cooler things. But for now, let's dive in. Okie dokie. So, flying, three-dimensional combat. I have to admit, I'm a little bit biased on this one because that was one of my favorite things about leveling up my very first Dungeons & Dragons character. When my Dragon Disciple got to the level where I could say I double move 30 feet straight up into the air, it was just a very big, wow, now we're super cool moment. I definitely am also one of those guys who, with a certain degree of regularity, has dreams that he can fly. It's a big hallmark of fantasy combat, fantasy stories, so on and so forth. It's also a staple spell to pick up, ability to achieve in mid to late game play, because otherwise, how does the fighter get to the dragon / how does the wizard get away from all the ground-based things? Is it powerful? Yes. Is it game-breaking? No. Far from. I think any damage to the meta is way overshadowed when we tell players, especially new players, that their idea for a really cool character concept doesn't work because of a reason like this. Now, granted, if lots of people at the table are new, if you, dear GM, are new, that's an entirely different story. But all it takes is a little bit of shaking up your encounters and a little bit of, well, I suppose meta knowledge. For the purposes of this, I will be speaking within the bounds of Pathfinder 2nd edition. This is kind of a universal, can apply to any system, and if I'm honest, I think the 5e guys and gals might have us beat here, given that, well, looks awkwardly at the Aarakocra race that got its fly speed without any nerf. I'm not mad about it. I'm a little sad about it. I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, Pathfinder 2 is a very cutthroat system. I've been over this. Y'all know how I feel about it, especially in low-level play. And low-level play is the only time that it really hurts that this fly speed is something that's so abnormal, because all the wizards are going to be grabbing this to weaponize the barbarians. Your Dragon Instinct barbarian into Dragon Disciple will be flying around. It's only at that low-level play that it's blowing everyone out of the water, and low-level play is so goddamn cutthroat. Now, different parties will approach different problems differently. If there are not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Atari archers on your battlefield, you're going to need to change the encounters. But within the bounds of a more traditionally built party, which 2nd edition's meta wants you to build, I don't think it's as big a deal, if I'm honest. Let us consider a standard party of 4. Fighter, rogue, cleric, and wizard. We will systematically, one by one, replace each member of this party who, for the purpose of this thought experiment, let's say is a human, with an Atari, and then run the same encounter versus, an equal amount of wolves. The level of the party is arbitrary, the gear of the party is arbitrary, whether or not the wolves have any templates on them, again, arbitrary, just a thought experiment. First and foremost, a flying PC in any role means that there are less targets on the board that can be easily targeted by non-ranged opponents. We're warned that a flying PC can easily trivialize combats, but it's also true that a flying PC means the marshals are forced to have to deal with more damage, which in turn means more need for healing, the acclimation of the wounded condition, and in turn the casters will have to contend with things in their face as the marshals drop. So in this particular example, let's say we have everybody's a human except the Atari rogue. Said rogue has built to stab things, skirmish in and out, something along the lines of stride into a flank, stab, and then stride up out of reach, and then that's what you're doing the whole combat to just stay out of the threat range of the wolves, who now are going to be focusing on the fighter theoretically. They technically can get to the cleric and wizard as well in this example. I'm going to assume that the wolves are seeing the magical energy flying out of the wizard and not responding with, shit, magical energy flying out of the wizard. Let's attack the wizard. They now will attack the thing, theoretically, in their face, the fighter, such that the fighter must then have a bad ratio of shield blocks to attacks coming at them, more crits, more time spending prone, and this is where your fighter is starting to tick up the wounded condition as the wolves, well, do as wolves do. Same's true with the fighter who, like in this example, wants to be in melee range anyway, so that feels like a wash, unless they're running around with a polearm, in which case it almost feels reasonable that the wolves might try to bite the halberd out of the Atorii hands, or again, now go after the rogue who's squishier and only has so many nimble dodges in their back pocket, right? Now, either one of your casters, replace either of them from human to Atorii, and yes, you now have someone who can theoretically fly above the board, spam magic missile down with no fear of reprisal ad nauseam. This seems really good, but generally speaking, low-level casters survive low levels because their foes aren't smart enough to recognize, again, what magic is. We talk about this more in my video on the wolf fallacy. You can follow this card right up here to learn more about that, and so are typically safe as houses behind the marshals while they ping away at the bad guys 1d4 points at a time. At least in the case of things like animals, they're generally safe anyway, so being airborne at low level does not really alter the balance IMO in a meaningful way. However, it does make your airborne, well, anything really, but specifically in this part of the example, casters, a better target for intelligent opponents with ranged weapons or flying creatures who can now single them out. If they must spend several turns striding farther away or striding back down to be close to the fighter, see where I'm going with this? The fly speed is almost completely negated, and if it's not, let's remember, kids, fall damage is a thing. Gravity is owie. Imagine how much less likely it would be to see flying PCs at all if fall damage worked like it did in the playtest, that 10 damage per 10 feet fallen. That damage presently is bludgeoning damage equal to half the distance you fall if you fell more than 5 feet. Any amount of damage is irrelevant. That damage is so much more significant if you are shot down. That means your first recovery check happens at dying 2 or dying 3 if, say, your low-level Atorii witch took an arrow against their weaker AC, noticed it landed square in their heart, held up their uh-oh sign, and then high-fived the ground with their face. That is now a PC who is about an inch away from death. Doubly so if they happen to land next to something along the lines of a hungry wolf, a hungry bear, a hungry hippo, whatever it happens to be, who now has the thing they probably wanted if they were attacking you in the first place, food to drag away with them. And this is doubly worse if you are wounded 1. In this scenario, if you are wounded 1, critically hit, meaning you then go to dying 3, then contact the ground, since you cannot use one action to fly, so at the end of your turn, oops, ground. Short of a really good recovery check, you're donezo. One might argue that that makes flying creatures balanced in a bad way, or, hard to play in low levels. God, maybe the Atorii not having a fly speed at low level play is more fair, just for their survivability. Bears and wolves aside, though, it's also very easy within the bounds of your encounters to change out said wolves, bears, and so on with other animals in that same level range with fly speeds or ranged attacks. I think that's often the argument. Well, my creatures just don't have an answer to flying opponents. At creature level 1 in 2nd edition alone, off the top of a quick Google search, the giant fly and giant cockroach both can keep flying opponents harassed and have pretty interesting reactions to maintain distance. Worse, the hunting spider's web can quickly bring you down to earth, leveling out the playing field. Truly, I played an Atorii barbarian in Rapunafuk, and the scariest encounter other than the one where I got hit with a javelin and killed, but that doesn't count. I distinctly remember 30-odd spiders throwing webs and entangling me. Shit's real spooky, and it's a very easy way to, again, have the same sort of flavor. It's just instead of hungry wolves, it's now hungry spiders, or every, like, blue player at a draft's nightmare. As far as your intelligent enemies go, it's very easy to just make sure somebody has a longbow, has their own magic, has javelins, has their own fly speed, so on and so forth, such that they can keep up with someone and keep them threatened, keep things in their face. This is only true, however, for like big open world encounters. A lot of times in those bounds, you also have a kind of big difficulty threatening archers and things anyway. A couple examples on that front. In our Kingmaker run, our Taurus, during the Vorticai arc, I just had to constantly spam Soul Eaters at him just to keep the Inquisitor with the firearm sweating a little as encounters would happen. And within the bounds of our Iron Gods game, Action, our gun chemist, we made it like 11 episodes, I think. And there's a lot of combat in Book 1 of Iron Gods before he ever got scratched, and like the mutagenic mauler had gone down once, if not twice prior. I'd been blinded and knocked out. I think 2 had as well. I think. Point is, the fly speed is kind of arbitrary on that front. Lastly, remember terrain. It's a very important thing when designing your encounters. As much as I am very want to, here is a whiteboard, here is my marker, I will draw the encounter. That's how I learned how to play D&D. I'm old, Gandalf. Most encounters happen in a very 3D space. Cover, trees, buildings, things of that nature can and will force a flying archer or flying caster to move closer to the ground in order to target their targets. Particularly the published stuff in like 2nd edition right now takes place inside dungeons. Not even like the 2nd edition APs, just in general. One half of this thing we're doing is called 5-foot hallways with low ceilings. The fly speed is good in some encounters, but will only get you so far. Unless, of course, your players are all a bunch of smarty pantses and know how to lure the entire dungeon out of the dungeon and into a big aerial ambush. And then lastly, last thing I'll say about this before I wrap up is, if they do that, if 4 players come to you and say, we want to be Rogue Squadron, take away the X-Wings, and add death to the Chelish, I think it's really cool to lean into that if you have the time and inclination to put together that kind of game, because that means these players are constantly thinking. That means these players are strategizing. That means these players are engaging. As a dungeon master, that's what you want. Engaged players, strategizing players, are players who are going to come back to your table, and players who truly are enjoying themselves, which is the crux of the game, right? I think the biggest hallmark in Dungeons & Dragons as a game master, if you know you're doing your job right, is when your players are strategizing and one of them looks at everybody else and says, okay, so this is really crazy, but, and then lays out a plan. Why do I think this? Because at this point, you truly have achieved immersion. They are not trying to answer a problem with mechanics. They are not trying to answer a problem with go there, fight this. They are improvising to overcome a problem, which is something that we as humans have to do in our everyday life when it comes to the table. I think you've done your job. But I digress. How do y'all feel about flying things in your campaigns? Are your campaigns no-fly zones? What is the most fall damage you've taken in a single round? Let me know in the comments below. Next week on Min-Maxing for Fun and Profit, I don't know what I'm building around in 2nd edition, but something from Lost Omens Ancestries. Till then, we'll see you next time.